The 2019 election, one of the most important votes in decades, with the future of Britain at stake potentially for generations to come. Tonight, live on ITV, we have 4 party leaders who want your vote. Welcome to the ITV election interviews. Good evening. We're just weeks away from what could be the country's most unpredictable election in decades. More than ever, your vote counts. In the next hour, the leaders of the Lib Dems, the SNP, the Brexit Party and the Greens will be live talking policy and giving their pitch for power. First up, Jo Swinson, fighting her first election as Lib Dem leader. Live from Edinburgh, the SNP's leader, Nicola Sturgeon, and First Minister of Scotland. Waiting in the wings, Nigel Farage, leading the Brexit Party into their first general election. And we'll be speaking to the co-leader of the Green Party, Sian Berry. We'll hear their vision of the country's future and get their response to tonight's debate between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. Before we speak to Jo Swinson, here's a flavour of the Liberal Democrat campaign so far.
I stand before you today, not just as the leader of the Liberal Democrats, but as a candidate for Prime Minister.
Jo Swinson has been the Liberal Democrat leader for a matter of months, but she's been clear about her party's position on Brexit from the beginning. She wants to cancel it. The Lib Dems say they're the only party of Remain, and they're working with Plaid Cymru and the Green Party to maximise the chances of the UK staying in the EU. But they say they won't work with either Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson if either need Lib Dem support to form a government. Away from Brexit, the party is making promises on childcare, mental health and the environment. With 20 MPs in the last Parliament, they're hoping their position on Brexit will lead to many more.
Jo Swinson, welcome. What can you promise people who vote for the Lib Dems next month?
Well, the Liberal Democrats can promise that we will stop Brexit, and that lets us build a brighter future for our country, because by staying in the EU, we know that that will be better for our economy, so there'll be more money to invest in our public services. We know it'll be better for our environment. We know it'll be better for people's jobs. And that will let us get on with the important job of improving people's lives. OK, fast forward to December the 13th. You are Prime Minister. What is the first thing you do to stop Brexit? I would revoke Article 50. That's something the Prime Minister has the power to do, and we would do that on day one.
How do you do that? Have you spoken to, say, for example, the civil service about the mechanics behind that?
It's effectively, it's a simple letter, and that can be sent by email. So it's a very simple procedure to do that.
How will you win round the 17.4 million people who 3 years ago voted to leave the EU in the referendum?
I think it's really important to listen to what people are saying. There's no doubt that Brexit is an issue which people feel very strongly about on both sides. And there's also not just one reason why people voted the way that they did. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people who I've spoken to who tell me that they feel like the economy isn't working as it should, that they have to work too hard and they still feel they can't get on, that their kids aren't necessarily going to grow up and have a better life than they have. And I think that's something that needs to change. Our economy isn't fair enough, and we do need to make that different. But leaving the European Union isn't the answer to those problems. In fact, it will make it harder for us to tackle those problems because we'll be poorer.
But how will you win around those people who do still want to leave and those people who did vote 3 years ago to leave? How will you win them round?
Well, we've got a lot of great ideas we're putting forward at this election. Just let me give you one example. There's lots of families that tell me that they are struggling with the unaffordable cost of childcare. It's a real problem for many people. It can be, £700 a month or more. And at the moment, there's very little help given to families until children are 2 or 3 years old. And that can mean the whole difference between whether somebody goes back to work when they've had a baby or whether they find themselves out of the workplace for possibly 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Now, by making sure we can have free childcare from the point at which paid parental leave ends, we're going to help those families improve their family incomes for many years to come and make their lives better in a really tangible way.
OK, I do want to move on to some of your other policies a little later. Let's just stick with this point about you being the party that you say you're the Remain party, you want to stop Brexit. From the doorstep, from the campaign so far, are voters clear as to why you are campaigning to stop Brexit, to cancel it, and also to support a second referendum?
Well, I think people are clear where we stand. I think when they look at some of the other parties, the Labour Party is all over the place on this issue. You can't get a straight answer out of Jeremy Corbyn on this, for example. But I think people, frankly, whatever their views are, very much recognise that we're standing up for what we believe in and we're being clear and honest about it. And why is that? It's not because of EU institutions. It's because it's a view of being internationalist, that there's big challenges that we face as a country, whether that's the climate emergency or international crime. And you tackle those challenges by working with your closest neighbours in partnership. And the European Union has been a really helpful and successful way that we've been able to do that. That's why we want to be members of the European Union, because of what it enables us to do together with other countries.
You watched tonight's debate. You've said previously both Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn, for different reasons, are unfit to be Prime Minister. Did you see anything that changed your mind? Anything that impressed you this evening?
I'm afraid not. And, I think watching that debate, people at home can be forgiven for just saying, look, surely we deserve better than this, than what was on offer from those two tired old parties, that we need something fresh and something different and a better choice. And I'm standing here as the leader of the Liberal Democrats, offering people that better choice to be able to build a brighter future. Because we can have hope. I think our country is an amazing place, and we should be able to look at the new challenges that are coming down the line, about how technology is shaping our lives, about how we can genuinely get on and protect the planet for future generations, for all of those children who are, so inspiring in the way that they are raising the issue of climate change. We can do all of that. But in Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn, you've got two men that are just squabbling over how to do Brexit and not really focused on the future at all.
Given your views on both of those gentlemen that you've been very strong about, are you ruling out working with either of them under any circumstances if you needed to support one of them potentially to get one of them into power, under any circumstances?
Liberal Democrat votes are not going to put either Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn into power, because I believe our country deserves better than either of them. And I think anyone watching that debate tonight, will surely agree with that. And, they both...
Even Jo Swinson, if that forced the country into another general election around the corner in 2020.
I appreciate Brenda from Bristol probably wouldn't be too chuffed about that, but I genuinely believe that what's on offer from both of those men is not good enough for our country. And I don't think that we should feel somehow that we have to accept it. People say that it's difficult to make change, but nothing will ever change if we don't stand up and say that we can have something better.
What about if one of them, the Tories or the Labour Party, changed their leader then? Would you reconsider your situation?
I mean, it's a hypothetical situation, but what I would say is that while, for various reasons, individually Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn aren't fit to hold that office, they're also a product of their parties. The Conservative Party has gone so far off to the right that the Brexit Party is standing down in half the seats, and Tommy Robinson is endorsing Boris Johnson for Prime Minister, and the Labour Party is away off in the far left. So even if they change their leader, I don't think there's any guarantee that they would be a more moderate figure.
You wouldn't work with either party if they changed their leader?
I mean, we don't know the hypotheticals, right? But all I'm saying is that those parties are not in a space which is where I think most people in Britain are, which is, open and inclusive and generous and liberal with a small L, and that's not where they are.
It's a hypothetical that we could wake up to, though, on December the 13th if either men don't get a majority, but they are the largest party. So I think viewers, especially viewers who might be watching who haven't yet decided who to vote for, might want to know what you might do next, what your terms and conditions are for working with either of them in any circumstances.
I think what I would encourage people to do is to look at our record, our track record in the last Parliament. You know, we have been very cooperative. You know, I've worked with people across different parties on the campaign for a people's vote, which we haven't quite secured.
And you worked in a coalition under the Lib Dems with the Tories, so they want to know, would you do it again?
And in the Scottish Parliament, we worked in government with the Labour Party, but those were very different parties then. But we have worked where we share values with other people. There are individual Labour MPs and Conservative MPs and SNP and Plaid Cymru and Green MPs who absolutely I've worked with. That kind of cooperation is part of how I do politics. But as I say, you've got very extreme candidates leading both of those parties at the moment, and they're taking their parties off to those fringes of politics, and that is not where I think the heart and soul of Britain is, and that's why Britain deserves a better alternative.
OK, Jo Swinson, let's move on to you and your campaign now with a few quick-fire questions. Forgive me if I push you for a yes or no or short answer at the very least. First of all, would you ever be prepared to use a nuclear weapon?
Yes.
That was a brilliant short answer. Thank you very much. Which world leader would you call first if you became Prime Minister?
Well, my favourite world leader is Jacinda Ardern, so she'd be pretty high up my call list.
So she's probably already on speed dial, that one then. Would you limit the number of flights people take each year to help the environment?
We've got plans for a frequent flyer levy that would be certainly discouraging many flights, but would be raising revenue from that. So it wouldn't be an outright ban or limit, but it would be an effective measure to change behaviour. OK. We've touched on this already this evening. Given the sometimes aggressive nature of politics right now, would you encourage a child or teenager to go into politics? I would. Do you know, when I get letters from children and young people, I was replying to a letter from a 7-year-old girl today on my campaign bus. And I think it's so important that that next generation is encouraged. And I really fear for what some of the toxic nature of debate does, because I absolutely want to look young people in the eye and say, yes, go into politics. But it's a yes. Let's turn our attention now to the NHS. And you want 1p on income tax for the health service and social care. Specifically, you have promised to fix the shortfall of GPs by 2025. That's only 5 years, 6 years from now. Where are the doctors coming from? Well, there's a range, but one of the places that they come from is other EU countries. You know, we have thousands, tens of thousands of people working as doctors and nurses in our NHS who are from other EU countries. And this is one of the reasons why leaving the EU is going to be so much of a problem for our NHS. But with all due respect, we haven't left the EU yet, and we've got the shortfall. But right, it's getting worse because of Brexit. We're already 5,000 nurses down. We can't afford to lose 5,000 nurses from other EU countries. So, I mean, that's part of what we need to do. And there's also things that we think we can do to help manage the workforce better. The government hasn't been planning properly what doctors and nurses were going to need, and they scrapped the nursing bursary, which meant a big drop in the number of people applying to nursing. So we've got huge shortages of things like mental health nurses, for example. On social care, it's not just about putting more funding in, is it? It's about a radical reform, about dealing with the fact that we've got a growing, ageing population. What's your answer beyond money to fixing the social care crisis? Well, I'll say two things. I think the first is we genuinely need to have a cross-party consensus to solve this issue, because it's one that is a long-term issue. But the other thing is about the status of people who care. You know, our care workers in our society are some of the people that work on very low incomes, like the woman in the audience who asked that question tonight. And it is often seen as some kind of, low status job. And it is one of the most important things when any of us think about our, parents or grandparents that might need care. What is more important than making sure they have that I'm with sure empathy? Nobody listening disagrees with that, but how do you transform that? I think it's going to be so much more important that becomes a profession that we encourage people into and that we raise that status, because it's one of the things, when you look at the challenge of technology, that, artificial intelligence and robots aren't really good at caring for human beings. They're not good at empathy. So that huge humanity of that profession is something that's going to be more important in the future, not less. And that's why we should be valuing it properly.
OK, Jo Swinson, thank you for that. A final thought. You have no choice, but in the future year, you are heading to I'm a Celebrity. You have no choice, I'm afraid. It's a bit Desert Island Discs. Which other current political leader would you want in the jungle with you?
Oh, goodness. Current political leader. I think I might unusually go for Nigel Farage, just having watched a bit of the footage earlier. Then maybe one thing that might make it a little bit more bearable is seeing him do a bush tucker trial.
Jo Swinson, thank you very much. Thank you. Right, what have the Scottish National Party got to offer? Let's take a quick look.
Our job is to deliver independence.
Nicola Sturgeon's led the Scottish National Party for 5 years. The SNP was the third biggest party in the last Parliament, with 35 MPs out of 59 in Scotland. As their name suggests, their main priority is Scotland becoming an independent country. And to do so, they want a second referendum. But for that to be legally binding, it requires permission from Westminster. If neither the Tories nor Labour win enough seats to form a government, they'll need support from the other parties. Nicola Sturgeon has ruled out supporting Boris Johnson, but she says she'd be willing to back Labour if they get a second independence vote next year. Beyond independence, the party is anti-austerity, anti-Brexit, and they say they want to protect the NHS from privatisation.
Nicola Sturgeon, let's start with your pitch. Why should people in Scotland vote for you?
Well, people in Scotland should vote SNP, firstly, to deprive Boris Johnson of the majority he craves, to make sure he doesn't have a free hand to do exactly what he wants to do. They should vote SNP to escape the chaos of Brexit, and fundamentally vote SNP to secure the right to choose our own future, so that Scotland's future, the kind of country we are and will become, isn't determined by Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn or a broken Westminster system, but is instead in our own hands so that we can choose that future ourselves.
Boris Johnson said in tonight's debate earlier that the SNP has already done a coalition deal with Labour. Jeremy Corbyn in response said there's no deal and no deal to be done. Given you are key to what those two were saying, which is it?
Well, no deal has been done, that much is true, but I've been very clear. I would never put Boris Johnson or, in fact, any Tory into Downing Street. I've seen the damage that Tory governments do to communities the length and breadth of Scotland and indeed the UK. I would want, if the arithmetic allowed this, to be part of a progressive alternative to the Conservatives. And I've made very clear that if Labour were in a position to form a minority government, then of course we would look to see the kind of issues that we wanted to pursue. I don't want to be in a coalition. I've made very clear I don't foresee a coalition, but a more informal arrangement is something I wouldn't rule out. And of course I lead a minority government in Scotland right now, so I know very well that a party in that position would need support from other parties. But crucial for me, of course, would be an acceptance that Scotland's future was up to the people of Scotland to decide, and that Westminster didn't have a veto over that.
And your timescale for that, just to clarify, is wanting a second independence referendum next year in 2020?
Yes.
And tonight...
Yes, and the reason for that is pretty straightforward, because Scotland is at a crossroads, the whole of the UK is at a crossroads, and we need to be able to determine which path we want to take. And the choice is very stark. Either we are taken down a path by Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn or whatever Westminster politician is in Downing Street, a path that we haven't chosen. Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU, or we decide ourselves what kind of country we want to be. So that decision is fundamental, and I believe an independent Scotland could be a much fairer, more equal, more prosperous country, and of course we could sit at the top table in the European Union wielding the kind of influence that we've all watched Ireland wield over the past 3 years.
I want to just get back to the issue of timescale though, because if you're wanting this independence referendum next year, Jeremy Corbyn has once again tonight ruled out you getting a second independence referendum in the early years of a Labour government. So does that rule out you giving him support, any kind of support, if he had a minority government?
Well, let me deal with that head on. But firstly, I think I have to say that Jeremy Corbyn's position on this does change almost every day. It's almost impossible to keep up with it. But there is an issue of principle at stake here that I would expect any Westminster leader looking to the SNP for support to accept. And that principle is this, that of course there's a difference of opinion in Scotland about whether or not we should be independent, but it is up to the people of Scotland to decide that question. It's up to the people of Scotland through its elected Scottish Parliament to decide if there is another independence referendum and also what timescale that should happen on. It's not for Westminster to dictate that. So it's that issue of principle that is crucial. Of course, I would want to see a Labour government do other things as well, bring about a definitive end to austerity, an end to welfare cuts, look to take a very different approach than the Tories to migration, to absolutely protect our NHS from trade deals and privatisation. So I drive a hard bargain, and first and foremost I would want to make sure that Scotland's voice and Scotland's interests were heard and protected in a way that they simply haven't been at Westminster over these past few years.
All right, Nicola Sturgeon, what happens if Labour does come into power on December the 13th and they do indeed get a second new deal with the EU? The country goes to a second referendum on the EU, Remain wins. Scotland remains in the EU. Does that cancel your rationale, your reasoning, your material change for wanting a second independence referendum for Scotland?
No, it doesn't. And the proposition that I'm putting to people in Scotland in this election is this. We have seen over the past 3 years, and Brexit is simply the illustration of this, that right now our future is not in our own hands. And Westminster governments can decide to impose a direction of travel and upon us and policies that we don't want upon us. And therefore, that really illustrates the importance of Scotland deciding for ourselves what kind of country we want to be. And, you know, that question of are we going to continue to, you know, have Westminster elections where we cross our fingers and hope for, you know, the devil rather than the deep blue sea? We simply hope that Westminster governments don't impose austerity or Brexit or any other policies that we don't choose upon us, or is it time to take that future into our own hands? That's the kind of crossroads moment Scotland is at, and it has real implications for our public services, for our economy, for the prospects of future generations. Scotland's one of the wealthiest countries on the face of the planet. We've got natural and human resources that other countries only dream of. And the question is, how do we maximise that potential as a country? And I believe that's as an independent country, but fundamentally, I believe that it must be for people in Scotland, not Westminster, to decide the direction we take.
If someone was coming fresh to the British political landscape right now, could you explain to them why you fight so hard to stay in one union and fight so hard to leave another?
Well, you know, on the face of it, that's a good question, but I don't think you have to stop and think for too long to realise how absurd a question it is. If you went to France or Germany or Spain or Portugal and suggested to them that their membership of the European Union meant that they weren't independent countries, they would probably look at you rather askance. All of these countries are independent, but they cooperate and collaborate, pool sovereignty where it makes sense in the European Union. The position of Scotland in the Westminster system right now is very different to member states within the European Union. Ireland's been the perfect example of that. During the whole Brexit saga, Ireland's had support and solidarity from its European partners. Scotland's been treated with utter contempt by the Westminster Parliament. Our views have been ignored. So Ireland's demonstrated the power and influence that small countries can have within the European Union, and an independent Scotland would be there as an independent, equal member. Of course, we'd always be working with and cooperating with our friends across the British Isles, but we'd also be there at the top tables in Europe, participating in the single market, the world's biggest single market, 8 times the size of the UK. That's what I think is the best of both worlds for Scotland.
All right, let's move on to your quick-fire questions, Nicola Sturgeon, if I may. First of all, would President Trump be welcome in an independent Scotland?
Well, I can't stop him coming to Scotland. I'm no fan of President Trump. As First Minister, I have said that I would, of course, not refuse to meet with him, but I'd be pretty clear with him about the many things I disagree with him on, as I'm sure he would be with me in return.
Would you be OK with a hard border between Scotland and England?
No, it's not my policy, it's not my objective, it's not my desire. It's not my policy that threatens borders. As we've seen, it's the policy of Brexit that threatens borders, which is why I will always argue for the UK to consider again the Brexit position and for the UK to remain within the single market and customs union.
If I can push you for a short answer, a one-word answer on the next one, please. Aside from independence, what's your #1 priority?
Domestically, I've prioritised education, but I think in this election, climate change has to be the big priority for all politicians. I know that wasn't one word, but I tried to keep it short.
Thank you for trying. Would Scotland replace the pound with the euro one day?
No, I don't think it would.
OK. What about if the UK did vote to leave and then you were in a situation where Scotland got its independence and then you rejoined the EU, you would be forced somewhere down the road to take the euro, wouldn't you?
No, we wouldn't. And there are examples in the European Union today that prove that's not the case. Sweden, for example, joined the EU after the so-called requirements to join the euro were in place. It's not in the euro, has no intentions of going into the euro. Jean-Claude Juncker, I think, is on record as saying that the EU cannot force any country into the euro against its will.
Scotland has the worst deficit in the EU right now. Would the rest of the UK be worse or better off if Scotland did gain independence?
Well, Scotland's deficit is falling. First of all, our revenues are rising. But if that argument is true, and we don't have time to go into it in detail, but if that argument is true and Scotland does have, to use your term, the worst deficit, as we are governed by Westminster, then that's a big argument for change for Scotland. We're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. So that says to me that we should do things differently, not do things the same. More generally, I think independence for Scotland would be good for Scotland, but good for the rest of the UK, because all of the countries of the UK would then participate and deal with each other on the basis of equality. We'll always be each other's closest friends, but we would do that on the basis of equality.
We saw a radical policy from Jeremy Corbyn earlier in the week, this talk of part nationalising BT to get broadband to all homes. Is that a radical policy that you would support if you did end up in some circumstances working with him?
Well, I'd want to see the detail of it. In principle, I think it sounds interesting. But of course, in Scotland, where we have some responsibility for these matters already, we're already in the process of delivering superfast broadband to every domestic and commercial premise across the country. We're about to sign contracts to do that. So we're ahead of the game there, as we are in so many other things. Actually, if you look at Jeremy Corbyn's manifesto, from free prescriptions to free personal care, free tuition, these are things the SNP government in Scotland is already delivering, which is why you don't need to vote Labour in Scotland, because the SNP is already doing most of the things that they commit to.
Nicola Sturgeon, if you had to appear on I'm a Celebrity, and I'm afraid I'm giving you no choice about that, which other current political leader would you like to take to the jungle and spend time with you?
Do I have to spend time with them? Can I not take them to the jungle and subject them to all of the really gory things? If I could do that, probably Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson, but I wouldn't want the condition to be that I had to spend any time with them. OK, you've given me two possible options there, Nicola Sturgeon. Thank you very much. Thank you. They're one and the same these days.
OK, we're going to take a short break now, but do stay with us. Up next, Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party. We've heard from the Lib Dems and the SNP. The Greens are coming up. But now it's time for Nigel Farage. Let's take a quick look at the Brexit Party.
I will not rest until we get genuine Brexit for our country.
Welcome to the stage, Nigel Farage.
Once again, Nigel Farage has taken centre stage during this election campaign, this time leading Westminster's new kid on the block, the Brexit Party. Its main focus ensuring the UK leaves the EU. Mr Farage will lead his party into next month's election, but he will not personally stand to be an MP. The party indicated they'd stand in some 600 seats, but in an election U-turn last week, the Brexit party said it wouldn't stand against the Tories in 317 Conservative-held seats. Instead, it's focusing its fight on winning seats in areas where Labour supporters voted to leave the EU.
Nigel Farage, welcome. What do people get if they vote for the Brexit party on December the 12th?
They get people who've come into politics not for careers, but done it because we actually want to get this referendum result delivered so that we're free of the European Union. And what they get is the one party that actually wants to change our political system. We think politics is broken, rotten, corrupt, not serving the people anymore. So we want real change to the voting system, to stop postal voting fraud, to get rid of the House of Lords and replace it with an upper chamber. We want to bring politics and democracy into the 21st century.
Was there anything you heard in the debate tonight between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn that made you regret your decision to pull those candidates from all those Tory-held seats, 317
Well, look, it was a big decision. It was a big decision, and let's be frank about it, not everybody in the Brexit party loved me doing it. I did it for two reasons. Firstly, because Boris Johnson changed direction and said he's going to go for a trade deal, along the Canada lines, not based on political alignment with the European Union. That was a big shift. I did it secondly because I could see that in the south of England, the southwest of England, where the Brexit party takes predominantly Conservative votes, that it would have led to a lot of Liberal Democrats perhaps winning those seats, and that might have taken us nearer to having a second referendum. And it was a moment where I thought, well, what I've got to do actually here, I've got to put country before party. That's why I made that decision. And so we now focus our efforts on MPs who are Remainers, MPs who either want to cancel Brexit or force us to vote in a second referendum. So I think it was the right thing to do, but not easy.
So you didn't do it because President Trump said it would be a really good idea to do it?
No, I didn't do it for that reason. Absolutely not. I mean, there's no secret that President Trump is a Brexiteer. He is a friend of mine. He's been saying for months he thought Boris Johnson and I should work together. And actually, I've been trying to put together a Leave alliance, to say to the Conservatives and others, this issue is bigger than any political party, but unfortunately, it's not something the Conservatives wanted to do. I think if we had, we'd have got some senior Labour figures involved as well, and the alliance would have romped the election, but that didn't happen.
Have you spoken to President Trump since you made that announcement, that decision last week?
No, I haven't, actually. I last spoke to President Trump when he phoned in to LBC and I spoke to him. I have not spoken to him since. He is not behind this decision.
Would you wake up on December the 13th, blame yourself if your decision not to also remove candidates in Labour Leave areas leads ultimately to the UK staying in the EU? Would you blame yourself?
There's only one party that's put Brexit at risk, a party that says it believes in Brexit, that's put it at risk. That's the Conservative Party, by refusing to make any concessions at all. There are about 140 seats in this country that the Conservatives have never won and will never win. In the European elections a few months ago, this brand new party, the Brexit Party, topped the poll in every one of those seats. Now, in many of those, we will be the challenger to the incumbent Labour MP. Leave seats with Remain MPs facing the prospect, if they won the election, of a second referendum. And if the Conservatives cared about us becoming independent, free of the European Union, if it really mattered to them, they actually would have stood aside in some of those seats and let us be the challenger. They've put this at risk, not me.
So you wouldn't at all blame yourself? You don't think you missed a trick there, and you wouldn't think,
no,
why did I make that decision?
If the Brexit Party didn't exist, if there wasn't an electoral threat from the Brexit Party, I'm quite certain no meaningful Brexit of any kind would happen. So the plan is to get some Brexit voices into the House of Commons to hold Boris Johnson to his promises. You know, he's very good at making promises. He's not always quite so good at delivering.
OK, you're not standing yourself. Do you regret that decision?
No, I don't. I tried this before. Look, it's a brand new party. It's been going for 8 months. You know, it's not like Jeremy Corbyn standing in Islington with a massive majority. He's only got to visit there once during the campaign. I'm out every day round the United Kingdom supporting our candidates. I could not do that and fight a seat.
All right, away from Brexit, let's look at some of the other policies of the Brexit Party. You want to offer people more direct democracy.
Yes.
What does that mean? Does that mean more referendums?
If people want referendums, they should have the right to call them. I think that in many ways the Brexit referendum was liberating. The fact that Westminster and the media didn't for a moment think that Brexit would be the result shows you how out of touch London is with the rest of the country. And so I think two things. Firstly, if there is a big issue, if people want a referendum on it, they should be able to get signatures and call for it. But secondly, you see, we thought the last one was legally binding because the government sent a leaflet through our doors. All the party leaders said we will abide by the result, and they haven't done so. So I think, given that we've got that, given we also have a Supreme Court making political judgments without being accountable to anybody, we're going to have a written constitution that says any referendum like that actually is legally binding.
What sort of areas would you want referendums on, given 3 years on from the last one, we're in the state that we're in?
Well, unlike Nicola Sturgeon, I wouldn't want to rerun the Scottish referendum or rerun the Brexit referendum. A result of a referendum needs to be implemented first. But it's not for me to decide, it's for people to decide. You know, I'm suggesting that if 15 to 20% of the electorate sign a petition to say we want to have a say on this issue, they should be able to do so. And to be honest with you, it wouldn't mean lots of referendums. It wouldn't be like Switzerland with several every year, but once every few years, if Westminster was completely out of touch with public opinion, the public could call a vote. And I think that's a very good idea.
You want to cut the foreign aid budget in half. You want to use that money to spend on people in the UK. Where does that put our standing globally?
Well, what we've seen over the last few years is us consistently be the highest spender on foreign aid, doing it to meet arbitrary targets, spending it in ways that, when it comes to light, enrage many people in this country. I think trade, not aid, is where we should be heading, and I think that as part of the European Union, we've put these barriers up against African countries and many others from selling their produce to us, freed from the European Union. We can do more good to help Africa and the third world. Trade, not aid, I think that's the way forward.
If you think it's such a bad idea, foreign aid, why not get rid of it altogether then?
Well, I'm not saying all of it's badly spent, and you can see where some of it is spent, whether it's tackling malaria or whatever else it may be. But so many projects under foreign aid are spent in politically bad ways, money sent to corrupt regimes that seems to disappear. I think halving of it is the right thing. But look,
you don't think it would change our standing in the world?
No, I don't at all.
As a country that helps other countries in any kind of need.
We are going to help them far more than giving them money to assuage our consciences. We're going to reduce tariff barriers. We're going to stop raping and pillaging their fisheries. We're actually going to help these countries to make themselves richer and better. But you raise an interesting point, because in this campaign, we hear, 100 billion here, 200 billion there, vast amounts of money being promised by both the Labour and Conservative parties. And what we're saying is, look, we can, by halving the foreign aid budget, by not giving a penny more to the European Union, by getting rid of the HS2 project, which benefits very few people, we can actually show you £200 billion of money we can raise in the next 5 years.
I want to move on to your quick-fire questions, if I may. You've mentioned you want to abolish the House of Lords. Does that mean you would never sit in it?
Do you know what? I've been bribed with becoming a peer and going quietly and being a good little boy.
Allegations of bribery, I should...
No, allegations. I've been offered this many times. I don't want to sit in the House of Lords. It doesn't work in the 21st century. Let's have no more political patronage.
What do you personally do to help the environment?
I have been for a few months now discussing an idea, and I'm very pleased to see that the other party leaders are now talking about it. When it comes to carbon dioxide, all we're talking about is cutting emissions. We're not talking about how it can be consumed. I want us to lead.
No, this isn't a party policy. What do you, Nigel Farage, do to help the environment?
I drive all over the country. I catch a lot of aeroplane flights every year. I am not a leading example, but I do think what the United Kingdom should do is go to the United Nations and let's start a global initiative. Let's start planting trees on a massive, massive scale.
Can't give me one thing that you do personally to help the environment.
Well, how can I? I catch aeroplanes, I drive cars.
OK, we'll move on. Is politics too toxic in 2019?
Yes, it is, and there's a very simple reason why. All through our history, as a democracy, if you lose an election, you may not like it, but you accept the result. It's called losers' consent. And for the first time in our history, the result of the referendum in 2016 has seen senior figures in British public life refusing to accept the result, insulting and abusing those who dared to vote for Brexit, and that's led to this.
Of course, there's insults on both sides since the referendum. Will we leave the EU in 2020?
We're leaving the EU. I think we will leave in 2020, but what I want to do is not just to leave Brexit in name only. Let's leave it properly. Let's be free of the institutions. It's going to liberate this country.
Is there a future for the Brexit Party after Brexit?
I think we're witnessing something historic. I think the Labour Party is beginning to cease to connect with working people all around this country. And I think the need for a radical political party that wants genuine reform and change, I think there's a big gap in the political market for it, yes.
But if Brexit happens, is there a need for the Brexit Party?
We'll have to rebrand it, won't we?
A final question, no surprises. Picture the scene. You've signed up for I'm a Celebrity. I'm not quite sure which year in the jungle. Which current political leader, there's been a few nominations for you tonight, a few votes. Which political leader would you take?
I've been asked onto I'm a Celebrity several times and said no. I think it would have to be Boris Johnson because he likes a drink and I could sit with him with a bottle of something and at length I could talk to him and perhaps I could find out what he really believes in.
Nigel Farage, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Next, the Greens and their co-leader, Sian Berry. Let's find out a little bit more about their campaign.
This must be the climate election. The future won't get another chance.
Why have one party leader when you can have two? Sian Berry and Jonathan Bartley both lead the Green Party. The Greens had hoped this election would be all about climate change. Around for almost 30 years, their policies are dominated by environmental pledges, which they say makes them different from the other traditional political parties. The Greens want a raft of measures to protect the environment and to get rid of nuclear weapons completely. On Brexit, they want to remain in the EU and are supporting the Lib Dems and Plaid Cymru by not putting up candidates in some seats.
Sian Berry, welcome. What can the Green Party offer voters in next month's election?
Well, it's quite clear from what we just heard that the choice in this election is between a Trump-inspired, Farage-enabled Tory Brexit and a group of parties who actually want to improve the lives of people in this country now. The Green Party has been a very strong voice for Remain, for more cooperation in politics. We've been leading the way with grown-up politics in this election, and we've been leading the way on being against austerity and being for the climate action that we need. We've been putting together some very big ideas and leading the agenda in this election so far, and I think people are really starting to take notice. We've had some of our most successful elections this year in the local elections in May and again in May in the EU elections too. We more than doubled our representation both times. We're ready to put more Green MPs into Parliament to be that strong voice for all the things that we stand for with integrity.
On climate change, the other parties seem to be catching up. Does that mean you are still relevant anymore?
I mean, I think the other parties are starting to take notice of the incredible climate movement that there is out there on the streets. We are so proud of the young people who are telling us that we have to take climate action now, and we're also ashamed that we haven't taken action sooner. Those young people, we can't say to them, you will grow up and you can take over and solve this problem. This problem has to be solved in the next few years. That's what the climate scientists are telling us. So this next Parliament is absolutely crucial. That's why we launched our manifesto today with 10 bills that the Green Party MPs will bring to the next Parliament. We'll be using whatever voice people give us to make that case because it's so very important. And none of the other parties are quite there yet. You've seen the spending plans of the other parties. They're not putting forward the level of investment we need, the Green New Deal that the Green Party is putting forward. So we're not going to get there if we don't put more Greens into Parliament to hold those parties to account.
We'll get onto that in a minute. From what you heard on tonight's debate, who do you trust more on the environment, Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, it's impossible to tell from that debate because the question about climate chaos was relegated to the quick fire section. I can't believe that neither of those two leaders brought up the most important issue that we face alongside Brexit. I think it's outrageous that everyone must have been at home crying out for Caroline Lucas or me or Jonathan Bartley to be there to hold them to account, to bring up this most important issue. The young people that are out on the streets literally begging us to do something about this must have been feeling so let down.
Let's talk about what you are offering voters then. You want to spend $100 billion a year for a decade on climate change policies, on getting this country carbon neutral by 2030. That is just a decade away. Is that really enough time if we don't even mention the money yet and we focus on the timescale? Can you really realistically do it in 10 years' time?
That is the time we have got. The scientists are very, very clear that by 2030 we have to become carbon neutral if we're not going to face a 50-50 chance of runaway climate chaos. I mean, in the Greens, we you know, these are not targets that we take lightly. We don't look at them and give up and say, well, we can't quite make it. We look at them and we say, look, yes, we're going to have to, yes, we can, and this is how. And it is about action at all levels. Some of the other parties have looked at climate action from the top down. They've seen we can only get part of the way, and they've said, oh, well, we'll give up then, we'll change our targets. And I'm outraged by that. This is Greens holding the other parties to account. Labour cannot go back on the 2030 target that their members have put forward. The Conservatives cannot hang in there with a 2050 target. It's not good enough. Greens say we need to fill in all the gaps with community level action, with huge investment in research and development to solve those final problems. We have to make the targets, and we need Greens there, making sure the other parties don't just leave them on the shelf like they have done for 20 or 30 years.
What, in practical terms, will the money be spent on to ensure this country does go carbon neutral in a decade?
So we're putting forwards £100 billion a year in investment. A lot of that goes into our homes. I mean, the thing that's been criminally neglected is the energy efficiency of homes. So many people live in cold, damp, expensive to heat homes, and that needs sorting out and will improve everyone's lives and people's health in the process. This is one of the best investments we can make, and it's a big chunk of our investment every year. Our energy infrastructure needs huge investment too. Our transport system, I mean, the Conservatives have been investing mainly in big new roads for the past 10 years. For the past 30 years, that's been the focus of most people's transport policies. Where our train system isn't good enough, our buses have been cut back by nearly half, and walking and cycling is absolutely neglected across the country. Big investments in transport are absolutely needed, and the rest needs to go into industry and research and development to get that new technology that we need to get that final bit of the way, as well as money for local councils so we can do community action and get more carbon neutral councils like the pioneering councils in Stroud and Bristol, where we've been pioneering, declaring a climate emergency and setting new targets and new action at a local level.
What would you do to get more people buying and using electric cars?
Electric cars are really important. We have to get away from diesel and petrol cars, but it isn't the main focus of a sustainable transport system. One of the best things you can do for sustainable transport is actually reduce the need to travel altogether by making sure people have their local services nearby, making sure that their libraries, their shops are not on the ring road, that the hospital hasn't been moved away.
Is it? It's quite easy to do that in the capital city. It's
so we
very
need to be
difficult to do
replacing
that in
the bus services that have been cut back. Rural bus services are virtually non-existent in parts of the country. We've literally got green councillors out there running bus services in order to give people who can't drive, people who get older, people who are unable to afford a car, unable to get them to reach their public services at all. We really do. I mean, this is what we're getting at here. We really do need to transform our whole country in the next 10 years. We know how to do it. We just need to make sure we've got the will and the investment to make it happen. And everybody pulling together across all our different communities.
Your ambition to transform the country is, in large part, based on borrowing a lot of money. The majority of that 100 billion comes through borrowing.
And these are good investments that'll pay back over time, and actually within the 10 years we'll start to see healthier communities and saving money on bills and all those things. These are very good investments we should have made a long time ago.
What if it doesn't work, though, and that level of borrowing harms the economy? Because then we'll have a lot less money to spend on fixing the climate change problems.
We have borrowed an awful lot under the current government. The amount we propose in the Green Party manifesto to put our borrowing up by is about the same as what the Conservatives have done since 2010. And if you look around, what have we got to show for that? Very, very little. Within a couple of years, you'll start to see a real difference in the country if the green investments start to kick in. This is, I think people are willing to listen to us now because they've listened to the other parties and they've seen no results so far, and we're ready to take our seats in Parliament and push the other parties all the way that they need to go in this election.
OK, I want to talk to you about the other parties and talk specifically about the Remain alliance. In around 40 seats, you have stepped aside. You're asking voters to vote Lib Dems, not the Greens, in this election. Both parties want a second referendum. You both have a Green Fund, albeit at different levels of spending. Why wouldn't all your supporters in this election vote for the Lib Dems instead of the Greens?
We're trying to promote a different way of doing politics. It's very, very healthy that we sat down with Plaid Cymru and the Liberal Democrats to make this arrangement, because we needed to do something to stop the dangerous Tory Brexit that will do so much damage. And we want to see more cooperation in politics. We saw from the debate earlier how unhealthy it is to just have two choices. A pendulum swinging between two big parties is not a healthy way to do politics. We need to have more cooperation, more parties working together, more parties talking to each other with respect, with honesty and integrity about what's good for the country. And that's what we've done in getting together in this Unite to Remain agreement. We're trying to stop the disastrous crash-out Brexit, get a strong group of committed Remain MPs in Parliament to finish off Brexit the democratic way with a people's vote and a final say.
In the last Parliament, you had just one Green MP, Caroline Lucas. You're not risking not getting more by asking people to vote Lib Dems in certain seats?
In certain seats, the other parties have stepped aside for us as well. In key seats now, there are Greens who are the strong Remain choice in that seat. You can elect them to Parliament and you know they're going to do a good job for you.
If the UK does leave the EU, isn't that putting this country in a stronger position to really push through some radical climate change policies and push them through much quicker than when you're working with 27 other member states?
I think that's a red herring, because climate change, air pollution, the big environmental crises we face do not stop at our borders. The way to tackle them is at an international level. We've got Green MEPs in Parliament, in Brussels, making big changes to environmental regulations, helping to sort out agriculture, helping to sort out air pollution. The only reason we've seen any action on air pollution in our big cities in this country is because we've got agreements at the EU level that we're supposed to be meeting, and we're actually not meeting them yet, but at least the agreements are there, and at least the MEPs are there arguing for that. I think it's really important that we do stay in the European Union for environmental reasons and for social reasons as well. A crash-out Brexit would harm the economy so much. It would do so much damage, and it's the people at the bottom in society who would suffer the worst from that.
All right, Sian Berry, just got time for your quick-fire questions. Is it ever OK for climate change protesters to stop people going to work on public transport?
I think Extinction Rebellion do a fantastic job, and the point of their protests is to be disruptive. But I do not agree with all of their tactics. And obviously, as a Green politician, my job, my part of the environmental movement is to get elected and change the laws, and that's my part of the job there.
Would you encourage young women into a career in politics, given the abuse they could face?
I'm asked a lot by young women about what it's like to be in politics. And it is really difficult to say to them, it's all fine, go ahead, because it is a very toxic atmosphere in politics at the moment. It's getting worse as well, and I think that really worries me. But I think anyone who wants to stand up for their communities ought to get involved, and get involved in a party like the Greens where you'll get a lot of support.
Aside from the climate change problems and the second referendum you want, what's your top priority? A one-word answer from you, please.
I want to eliminate poverty. We need to bring in that universal basic income, raise the minimum wage to £12. That's the living wage that people deserve. At the moment, we've got a punitive welfare system designed to throw people into destitution, and that has to end.
Poverty, and the question you know that I'm going to put to you, you're in the jungle. Which other current political leader would you want to be in there with you?
Obviously, my co-leader, Jonathan Bartley. We're a strong team and we'd win, no problem.
You had a bit of time to think about that, no doubt.
It wasn't a hard question.
Sian Berry, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And there we have it. You've heard what the parties have to offer. It's over to you now to decide who gets your vote just before Christmas in the first December election in nearly 100 years. For reaction to and analysis of what you've heard from all the party leaders on ITV Tonight, the news is coming up next. And for viewers in Wales, after the news, a chance to hear a full interview with Liz Saville-Roberts, the Westminster leader of Plaid Cymru. That's at 11:30 this evening. On December the 1st at 7 p.m, there'll be another election debate here on ITV. 7 political parties have been invited. Head online to get more on that, plus all the very latest from the election campaign so far. That's all at itv.com/news. For tonight, though, good night.